The premium lounge section of Skyjet Flight 437 hummed, with the quiet murmur of passengers getting comfortable, the soft chime of seatbelt reminders, and the occasional rustle of luxury travel bags being stowed away. Samantha Hayes, a senior flight attendant with years of experience under her belt, adjusted the crisp collar of her uniform, her well-trained eyes sweeping over the cabin for anything out of place. Her gaze paused on a distinguished-looking black couple settling into their spacious seats with a young girl between them. A flicker of hesitation crossed Samantha's mind, an instinct, a doubt she couldn't quite shake. The man, poised and self-assured in a charcoal suit, assisted his wife in tucking their carry-ons overhead, while their little girl clutched a stuffed bunny in her lap, swinging her legs absent-mindedly. Before Samantha had even fully processed the thought, she found herself walking toward them, her polished heels tapping purposefully against the plush carpeting. "Good evening," she greeted, her tone professional but noticeably stiff. "I'll need to check your boarding passes, please." Julian Carter, the father, barely reacted. He had encountered this scenario more times than he cared to count. Maintaining his calm, he reached into his inside pocket and pulled out 3 meticulously folded tickets, offering them without a word. His jaw tightened slightly as Samantha scrutinized them, her eyes scanning for something, anything, that might justify her suspicion. His wife, Brielle, felt it too. She placed a reassuring hand on their daughter, Maya, whose bright eyes darted between her parents, sensing an unspoken tension. Samantha forced a polite, tight-lipped smile. "One moment," she said before turning swiftly and disappearing behind the velvet curtain that separated the first-class area from the rest of the aircraft. Julian exhaled slowly, pulling out his phone and typing a message with swift precision. Brielle didn't have to ask whom he was contacting. She already knew. What Samantha didn't realize was that Julian Carter wasn't just another passenger. He was a major investor in the airline, a fact that would soon become very relevant. Minutes later, she returned, her expression carefully composed, but with a stiffness around her mouth. "I'm sorry, but there appears to be a seating issue," she announced with forced authority. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to economy class." A hush settled over the surrounding passengers, conversations cutting short as people turned to observe the unfolding situation. Julian remained seated, his tone steady but unwavering. "We reserved these seats weeks ago. What exactly is the issue?" Samantha hesitated for a fraction of a second before regaining her stance. "It's just a standard adjustment. Unfortunately, I need you to relocate." A murmur of discontent spread through the cabin. A gentleman seated nearby glanced over his reading glasses at his companion. "They were among the first aboard," he remarked quietly. "That doesn't add up." Maya, still too young to grasp the full context, tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, are we in trouble?" Brielle swallowed the lump in her throat and smiled gently at her daughter. "Of course not, sweetheart." Julian finally stood, his presence commanding attention. "If this is truly a policy matter, I assume security would be involved. Perhaps we should call them over to clarify." The confidence in his voice sent a ripple of unease through Samantha. The growing attention from fellow passengers, the questioning gazes, suddenly, it felt as though the air had thickened around her. Nevertheless, she turned on her heel, heading toward the front of the aircraft to notify security, unaware of the silent exchange of looks between Julian and Brielle. By the time the Carters were escorted to the economy section, Julian had already sent the message that would trigger a reaction far beyond the cabin. Moments later, an urgent call was received in the cockpit from the airline's corporate headquarters. Meanwhile, Samantha, attempting to steady her hands as she arranged cutlery on meal trays, was interrupted by the captain's voice over the intercom, summoning her to the flight deck. What followed would change the course of her career forever. Julian Carter wasn't just another passenger. He was a key investor in the very airline Samantha worked for. The realization hit her like a gut punch. Her grip tightened on the edge of the service counter as her stomach twisted with unease. Beside her, her co-worker, David, appeared, his expression tense. "You know who that was, right?" he murmured. I didn't," Samantha admitted, her voice hollow. David let out a slow breath. You just targeted the wrong family. The weight of his words crushed her. Every second of the encounter replayed in her mind, now laced with painful clarity. This had never been about boarding passes. It had been about her own assumptions. The directive came swiftly. She was to deliver a formal, face-to-face apology. Walking back to the economy section felt like trudging through quicksand, every step heavier than the last. Julian and Brielle sat side by side, Maya tucked between them, her bunny clutched close. The family was calm, yet the air around them carried the unmistakable weight of injustice. "Mr. Carter," Samantha began, forcing her voice to stay steady, "I deeply regret my actions earlier. I sincerely apologize." Julian met her gaze with unwavering resolve. "This isn't about an apology," he said. "It's about systemic change. What happened to my family today happens all the time. The only difference is that I have the resources to challenge it." His words resonated beyond their row. Passengers shifting in quiet acknowledgement of the truth. The consequences were swift. Within hours, the news spread like wildfire. Hashtag airline reform trended across social media as people shared their own stories of being judged unfairly. At Skyjet's corporate headquarters, CEO Veronica Miles convened an emergency board meeting. Across from her sat Julian, his terms non-negotiable: mandatory bias training, independent audits, and regular progress evaluations. "This isn't just a PR disaster," Julian stated. "It's about fixing a broken culture. Every passenger deserves to be treated with respect. No exceptions." The board had no choice but to act. Training programs were redesigned. Internal policies were rewritten. The airline's leadership began dismantling deep-seated biases, not just in policy, but in practice. As for Samantha, she faced her own reckoning. Removed from her position, she found herself alone, confronting the consequences of that single decision. But rather than wallow in resentment, she made a choice, one that would redefine her. She signed up for bias training, not as an employee, but as a student. She began unlearning years of ingrained prejudice, peeling back the layers of unconscious bias she had never questioned before. Soon, she was invited to speak at industry workshops, openly acknowledging her missteps and helping others confront their own blind spots. Months later, Julian sat in his home office, reviewing the airline's latest report. Complaints of discrimination had sharply declined. Respect and dignity were no longer just corporate slogans, but lived experiences. Nearby, Maya played with her bunny, making it soar through the air with giggles of delight. "Daddy," she asked, "remember that time on the plane when the lady told us to move?" Julian glanced at the report, then back at his daughter. "I do," he said with a gentle smile. "Did we help fix it?" He set the papers down, meeting her bright, curious eyes. "We did, sweetheart," he said. "We really did." Samantha's journey from error to enlightenment became a case study, a warning, but also an example of growth. Because sometimes it only takes one moment of injustice to ignite a movement. In the months that followed, Skyjet Airlines transformed, not just in policy, but in culture. Passengers were no longer just ticket holders. They were individuals deserving of dignity. Julian's quiet stand had sparked a corporate reckoning, proving that change starts when injustice is no longer tolerated. Meanwhile, Samantha, once the face of bias, became its loudest challenger. Her story served as both caution and inspiration, a testament that unlearning prejudice is possible. As Maya soared her stuffed bunny through the air, Julian smiled, knowing their battle had meant something. Because sometimes a single moment isn't just a mistake, it's a catalyst.